Sorry I'm a couple of minutes late. I was at my pal's virtual birthday party. But I'm here now. And we'll see who else pops up. I'll post another advert while I'm at it. I'll just get this posted. So, how are we all doing? Apologies, I am having a cigarette. I've had a wee mad half hour. This is the first time I've sat down for about, I say mad half hour. First time I've sat down since about 12 o'clock. So, today we're going to talk about some of the big houses. Now, I don't know which ones you wanted to know about. So, I've looked up some details on a couple of them that I wasn't that familiar with. And one story that's been up here for a long time. So, first off, I thought we'd start with the most famous big house in Elgin, Grant Lodge. Grant Lodge, admittedly, yes, it's one of the ones I had to look up. So I will be flicking backwards and forwards between the pages. Some of you already know Grant Lodge is a B-listed building. It was started in 1766 and finished in 1790. It was designed by Robert Adam, who's one of the more famous Scottish architects of that period. It's also now the only building in Moray that's left that was designed by this man. It was built for Sir James Grant, who was the Moray MP at that time, and who also became one of the leading improvers in the north of Scotland in 1820. This first bit, yes, absolutely, is going to have to be read out because I've had so much going on the day. One of the bits that the page I found picks out is the Grant Raid. During the election in 1820, two of Grant's supporters on the town council were kidnapped and sent across the Moray Firth in boats to prevent them from voting for him. By the time they got back to Elgin, it was too late and the vote had been finalised. The lodge then became the focal point for a major clan rising, the last ever to take place in Scotland. There is a link to the full story. I've actually got it off of the Friends of Grant Lodge website. So, because I figured they will have done slightly more research into it than some other people have. Do you want to hear the story about the clan rising and the Grant Raid? So I go through and read you a story rather than telling you one off the top of my head. It was sold later in the 1800s and it was extended. In 1899, it was sold to Sir George Cooper, who was a lawyer in town, hence the name Cooper Park. In 1903, Sir George Cooper gave the lodge and its grounds in a deed of gift for the benefit of the people of Elgin. And there's a wee movie, the snippets of the wee movie of the opening day for Cooper Park. If you happen to be out and about, you'll not see it till we're allowed to go out and play now, I don't think. But the movie that runs on the side of the St Giles Church of an evening has snippets from the opening day, the first ever day that Cooper Park was open to the public. You see everybody in their top hats and their finery getting ready to go down. Now, it stayed as the Cooper Park and Grant Lodge being the library up until 1996. In 96, the building was deemed unfit for the purpose of being a library. So the library was moved into the drill hall, which a lot of us will remember. Okay, no worries, Audrey, I'll see you later. So, library moved into the drill hall, Grant Lodge became the archive centre, the heritage centre. Now, the biggest guilt trip I have ever had and will ever have. 26th of July 2003. I was coming home from work. It was a blistering hot day. As I passed Grant Lodge, I could smell smoke, but I walked all the way around the building 3 times. No sign of fire, no sign of smoke coming up, no sign of anything, but I could still smell it. So I wrote it off as a bushfire somewhere in the distance, and I carried on my journey home. That was about 6:30 in the evening. 10 o'clock that night, it was on the news that Grant Lodge was on fire. If I had made that phone call when I smelled the smoke, it might have made a bit of a difference. But we all have days where we think, oh, it's nothing. And it turns out to be something. Grant Lodge is my personal biggest guilt trip that I will ever have in my life. And to this day, it upsets me that I didn't make the call. So from that day to this, anytime I smell smoke or see smoke, I make the call now. A lot of the local fireys know me, and I've explained why I always make the call this time. Because you never know. I don't want the same thing to happen again. So I make sure I make the call now. The building wasn't actually that damaged. Most of the damage caused to the building was by the water used to put the fire out. And there's been an ongoing saga of pricing up, looking into plans to repair, reopen, and all the rest. And nothing seems to have happened. The official line on the site is the council boarded it up and did nothing. The fire damage was not significant. You'd be surprised at how good the condition of the interior is, as some of the people from the Murray Camera Club can actually tell you, because I've seen photos from the Murray Camera Club from inside. Many of the old documents were sent for restoration to Edinburgh, and others were sent for storage in Aberdeen and Inverness. The council has not paid any of the bills incurred for the service of restoring and protecting these documents, which is why some of us are having difficulty tracking down certain documents. My friend, who's related to Lachlan Mackintosh and HB Mackintosh, one of their last manuscripts was in a glass case on display at the top of the stairs in Grant Lodge, and it was on loan to Grant Lodge because of what it was. It was just a manuscript. It was never ever published. My friend's been trying to get that manuscript back. Elgin Museum said it was at Forres. Forest Museum said it was at Elgin. I think it's one of the documents that was sent off for protection or restoration, and because the council hasn't paid the bill, we're not going to get the documents back, unfortunately. So the last of the Mackintosh books looks like it will never ever be published unless someone's listening who can pull some strings for us. That would be quite handy. Fully costed development plan was drawn up before 2013, including registrar, function room, heritage centre, purpose-built archive, all the rest, everything ready to go. All the funding had been secured, and then the council backed out. That's the official line off of the Grant Lodge page. So it's left. There has been a little bit of restoration work done, but most of that has been when it looks like a bit of it's going to fall down. Like for a while it looked like the porch was going to cave in on itself, and they actually fixed the pillars to stop that from happening. Now you've got the portraits on all the doors and windows of some famous and some not so famous people of Elgin's history. It was a beautiful building inside. I would love to see it being used again, but whether that ever happens or not is a different matter. Too much politics involved in all of it now, I suppose. But hey ho. Now, I've got two buildings next that are both connected by one person. Patrick Sellars, the man responsible for the Highland clearances. He used to be the factor on the Findrassie estate. And at that time, which is on the Elgin-Hopeman Road. And while he was there, he did some maths, just out of curiosity. And he worked out that the landowners could get more pounds per square mile of their land if they put sheep there, instead of having the tenant farmers. And he showed his boss this. This was just something he had done as an idea for his boss, because they had empty land. They had empty tenant houses that were not being used and land that wasn't being used. And he was looking at a way to use the land and still have some money coming in. Well, his boss had a few friends who were in Parliament, and he told them about this thing that Patrick had done. And they all thought this was a really good idea. Sorry, I'm like 2 days away from cutting my own hair. It's driving me demented. And everybody thought it was a fantastic idea. So they all got a hold of their pals, who got a hold of their pals, and everybody instigated the same thing. Get the sheep in, get the people out. Patrick's whole idea was just to fill the vacancy that they had on their estate. It wasn't an idea to move people out. It was, let's put sheep there until we get people to take up the tenancy. That's what the idea was. But they ran with it. All they could see was pound signs. So a lot of tenants throughout all of Scotland were asked to leave the land that they were on. A lot of tenant farmers. This didn't work, so they started laying threats. They started increasing the rents to make it more difficult for people. And eventually, over a number of years, they got the idea to force people out of their house. And when I say force, I mean burn the house down around them, which is what a lot of them did. This is why if you're out driving across the moors or along the west coast, anywhere up in the remote Highlands, every so often you see a wee house in the middle of nowhere that looks like it used to have fields, but there's only like ankle-high rubble boundaries now because the rest of it's fallen down. And the house appears to be livable apart from the fact that the roof's caved in now. These houses are some of those where the people were forced out. A lot of them who went by choice were relocated in the beginning. In the first few months, if you decided, yeah, okay, I'll take up the boss's offer of moving out, because some of them were kind enough to offer like a wee resettlement thing. But pretty much nearly half of everything north and west of Aberdeen, people were forced out of their houses, forced to leave. This is why there's a lot of Scottish people moved to Ireland, moved to the US. This is Patrick Sellars fae the Findrassie estate is one of the reasons half of America claims, I have a Scottish great-great-granddaddy, because of Patrick Sellars fae the Findrassie estate. Because this was all his idea, a lot of these landowners were grateful for his idea. And he was sent tributes, he was sent presents, he was sent money from some of them, not all of them, because a lot of them would have made Ebenezer Scrooge look like the guy giving out the lottery money, but some of them sent him money. His boss gave him a promotion. He didn't have to live in the quarters in the Findrassie house. He bought a house, which those of you over the age of 30 might remember as the Park House Hotel, up behind the big post office, behind the parcel delivery service. The Park House Hotel became his house. Now, at that point, it was the only thing there. There was no post office thing there. The street was just like a way of getting up onto the road to Rothes. It wasn't a built-up street. It was the only thing. And the area that the house was in was known as Westfield. So, I say so far too often, sorry about that. So he has this big house, which later on becomes the Park House Hotel, and it's in Westfield. By the end of his life, half the population hated him, and half the population loved him. He was buried in Elgin Cathedral. When the full extent of what he caused became known, they moved his grave. He was already built in the shadow side of the cathedral. If you're buried in the shadow of the building, the church, the cathedral, whatever, you're not very popular. He was moved further away from the cathedral and put to the extent that he is barely inside the railings of the cathedral. So that shows how unpopular he was. But the area they moved him into did actually become the private, that's okay, did actually become the private family plot for his descendants. So there are two New Orleans style box graves within a little wall. It's only an ankle high wall. And that's Patrick Sellars and his family buried there. His plaque that names him faces out onto the street. It's a black plaque on the top, and it says nothing about the Highland clearances or anything like that. It just says Patrick Sellars of Westfield. Exactly. I know. That's what made me think to do that one. So his tomb just says Patrick Sellars of Westfield. Now, unfortunately, he gets spat on when the building's open. He gets spat on at least once a week by some American. But my argument for that is that if they'd stayed in their wee croft in the back end of Nayway and the family had stayed in Scotland, they wouldn't have the money to come halfway around the planet to spit on someone's grave. So technically, he probably did them a favour. Because if they'd stayed here, they'd be as skint as the rest of we are. But that's the connection between Findrassie House and Park House. Now this other one, I can't remember the name of it for the life of me. It's not too far away from that either. If you follow that road from where the chip shop was, across the back of the post office, when you get to the roundabout that used to be the Comet roundabout, on your left is a big Georgian style house. It's a giant square box, more or less where the new GP surgery is. GP surgery is pretty much in the car park for that building at the back. That house was one of the last fully modern equipped Victorian houses in Elgin. As you look at the front of the house, so if you stand with your back to the Mansfield Hotel and look at the front of the house, the window to the right-hand side of the front door was the ironing room. Every Victorian house of status had an ironing room. Now, this sounds like a big waste of space. That's it, Highfield. Thank you very much, Louise. An ironing room is not a waste of space because ironing in Victorian times was very, very different. Folk like me and you would have a wee metal thing that we sat on the front of the fire grate for a wee while to heat it up, and then we'd go over the clothes that way. But when you've got a big Victorian house and you're ironing bed linens and stuff, well, that's what that room was for. So you go into the front door of the house and you turn to your right to go into the ironing room. The ironing room was divided in half with a big built-up unit that would have been about waist height and about 2 foot wide, 3 foot if you had the money. At one end of this, there's a massive wooden box, big enough for a person to climb into. So about 3 foot by 3 foot if you've got one of the 3 foot wide units. Sounds about right for Elgin, double standards, honey. But yes, it would be the perfect place for a pub because the main road that's now the A96 was always the main road, so it would be a perfect place to stop off for a drink. So you have this big 3 foot by 3 foot box, and it's filled with river rocks or any scrap metal you've got. Anything that's heavy would have gone in this 3 by 3 box. And from each corner of the box, there's a bit of rope comes up into the middle. Then there it's all twined together, goes round a pulley system, up into the ceiling, across to the other side of the room, down the wall, where there's like a flagpole set up where you've got the bitties, the wee sconces sticking out to tie the rope around. That's your ironing table and your iron. Sorry, I look like Nosferatu. I broke my tooth today. Nothing we can do about it. So, you get your bed linen, slightly damp. You don't want it too dry. Slightly damp, because softener's not been invented yet. Your only softener is sticking it outside in the washing line. If you've got the time, you take your rocks or your scrap metal or whatever out of the box and put them round the biggest fire in the house, so the kitchen fire or something like that, to warm up. Once you've got the washing that's only slightly damp laid out on the unit, you lay it out as flat can possible, as least wrinkles as you can get. Put your hot rocks back into the box. Yes, I'm fully aware of the ambiguity of that phrase, but I'm talking about ironing. Put your hot rocks back into the box, undo the pulley system at the other end of the room, and heave this massive box across the sheet. Then you go down the other side of the room, get the other bit of rope, and heave it back that way. If you're lucky, you've got somebody to help you, so you can have one of you either side of the room. If there's just you, you're literally running backwards and forwards just to move this box of rocks across the sheet to do your ironing. Of course, the rocks cool down quite quickly because they've not got a heat source. If you want to cheat, you can get one of the bed warmers with the hot coals in and put it in the middle of the hot rocks in the box. That will keep it warm slightly longer. But it's always a case of pull it across the room, go back to the middle, readjust the sheet, move it up to the next bit, over to the other side of the room, pull the box back across. That's why you needed a room. That's why it was an ironing room. Highfield House was the last house in Elgin to actually have an ironing room. And you think you hate ironing nowadays. Can you imagine it then? Mind you, then it would probably count as exercise too. So, any other particular big houses you've thought of that you wanted to know about? Because that's the ones off the top of my head that I do know. Or anything else you want to ask about? Tick, 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 tick. I'm looking at an aerial photo of the town to see if I can get anything else. See if anything else springs to mind. Because we basically covered Lady Hill House, the bit that I do know about it, in the other one, the one about Lady Hill. I know there's one on the way to Tesco. You know, if you're going to Tesco on foot from the high street, you go across the road and along that wee back street where the Undertaker's is. There's a big house that's more or less level with the crossing. It's just slightly to your right as you're going over the crossing. Not the abandoned one, or the one that looks abandoned, but the other one with the white tower on the top. It's got a little white wooden tower on the top. I don't fully know anything really about the history of that house, but I do know why it's got a little white tower. Not sure if it was a hotel, a stagecoach pub, or what, as in stagecoach with wagon and horses, not stagecoach Bluebird. But the white tower at the top is where your deliveries would have been brought in. So you've got your horses going through the arch, would have been where the front wall is. But there would have been a big arch there, because you've got the other building joining into it. Go through the invisible arch, it's not there anymore, with your coach and horses. Horses are getting taken off to the stables, which would be the left-hand side of the courtyard, which now is the big old, there's like a big old barn there that was being used by Parrot Pine for long enough, but I don't know who actually uses it now. The one where they've put the big boulders in front of it now. And then the people would go into, presumably, what would have been the back entrance of the Stagecoach Inn. If you have deliveries coming in at the same time, you don't want them getting in the way of the horses getting to the stables or the customers getting inside. So, above, well, opposite your archway, you would have your delivery door, which would be one floor up or two floors up if need be, depending how much was actually used by the customers. And that, again, would be on a pulley system. So you would send down the hook, get somebody to hook it onto the sacks of grain or the luggage or whatever was being brought into the Stagecoach Inn, and it would be pulled up into the upper floors and then taken down through the building to where it should be. That way they're not blocking any of the entrances. The stuff is kept on an upper floor to keep the bugs and the rats and things out. So they thought. It didn't always work. And anyway, you see one of these funky little square towers on the top of a building, it's the delivery hatch, basically, for when they had goods being delivered into the building, because having it up on the upper floor stops it from getting in the way of walk-in trade. I haven't looked into the actual proper history of that building, but that's just an observation from outside. I'm still trying to think of big houses. Anybody thought of any big houses or anything in particular about Elgin that they want to ask? Come on, you've had 5 minutes to think about it now. Every other building I can think of has been purpose-built for a business of some description or the other, rather than a big house. So if you think of anything, let me know as soon as. Or is there something else you want to talk about? Tick, tick, tick. See, this is why I usually have music in the background, because I hate listening to the clock in the background. I know it's a slight change of topic, but from your position in front of the Mansfield, if you turn around and look at the Mansfield, if you're old enough, you'll remember the Murray drawing office being in there. That's where we used to get our art supplies when I was at college. Yes, I'm that old. The grounds, or what is now the grounds of the Mansfield, but used to be the drawing office shop, there was a school there many, many years ago, a couple of 100 years ago. The headmaster, or one of the headmasters of that school, was a man you might be familiar with. The idiot box in the corner with all the adverts on. You're purposely not watching the news because you don't want to hear about this horrible virus, but there's an advert comes on every 30 seconds about it. That idiot box. John Logie Baird was one of the headmasters at the school that used to be in what is now the grounds of the Mansfield Hotel. One of the teachers that was there during the lifetime of the school was the man whose name I can't remember, who invented penicillin. He was a teacher there when he was a young man. Mr. Bell, the inventor of the telephone, he also taught at that school. Granted, none of them were local. They were just teachers who travelled about for a living. But they taught at that school, or were the headmaster of that school for a wee while. I haven't been able to... That's it, penicillin's Fleming. Thank you very much, Jean Ann. I haven't found when that school was taken down. The drawing office building was a relatively recent one, 60s or 70s, looking at the way it was built at the time. When it still stood. And I don't know why the school was shut. To be knocked down. See, this is what I'm saying. There's limited storage in here. And some information just isn't available. Yeah, we can blame the fire on Grant Lodge destroying documents. Well, not so much destroying documents, but taking them out of Murray and making them inaccessible. We can also blame the 2 fires at the cathedral, because the cathedral used to store the town's archives. And the 3 fires at the cathedral, should I say. The cathedral used to store the town's archives. during the times that it was burned. So, yeah, there's not a lot out there to read anymore on Elgin's history. A lot of the information I have found has been from books like this one. A survey of the province of Moray. Okay. Most of these have been digitally photographed and uploaded onto Google Books. And this is where I get a lot of my information from. And when I get this set out, inside the front cover, we have a map, which I'm going to take you down and show you if the cable's long enough. So we have Flour Mill, Calder. Let's see. Dalvey, Kincorth. Where are we? This is Moray. There's Nairn. So this and here, you've got all down. Then you've got Forest, Burnley, Avis, and Elgin, which is not very well lit. Hang on. This is a three-hand job, this. There we have Elgin. With Spiny Loch at the top, Ardavet House marked, Spiny Castle marked, Ash Grove, Westfield, right the way out by Duffus Castle. See, there's another small, see how the road goes up between the two lochs? So the big one is Spiny Loch. Then you've got the road, then you've got a wee loch. Then you've got New Spiny, Duffus Castle, Duffus and Roseisle. And just under Duffus, you'll see the word Thunderton. That's Thunderton, the village. Yes, there was a village called Thunderton. Of course, Gordonston. There's the settlement of Kinneder that we were talking about last night. The settlement of Stotfield as well. So I love these old maps, you see. And you get them turning up. You know the thing I find funny? This here is Nairnshire. Then you've got a strip of Moray coming down here. And then you've got a strip here that's Inverness-shire. So, Abernethy was classed as Inverness-shire, even though it's away over here. But that's just inside the book. And when we get it folded up, I'll show you how old. Well, this book is a reprint. This book is a reprint. That's why the map's in such good condition. The date on the first page of the book. Anybody any good with Roman numerals? MD CC X CV II. Now, to my mind, that's 1798. Now, as I say, this is a reprint, but you have surnames in the town, thanes in the town, And then you've got the family names. Gordon, Grant, Skugely, or however you're supposed to pronounce that. Innes, of course. Brodie, of course. Calder. Calder House on Elgin High Street was a massive house. There's one we can do, actually. Calder House. Right, oops. Camera doesn't want to set up now. Calder House was on the high street, where the outdoor shop is now, the one that used to be Oliver's. Calder House was 3 or 4 floors high. I think it was 3 floors high with a basement, to be honest, but some books say 3 floors, some books say 4. And it would have been within about 4 foot of the wall of what is now Poundland until about halfway through the Clydesdale Bank. Massive, massive house. The last documented owner was a doctor who was a single man. Now, I'm ruining one of my stories for my tours here. He was involved in the research into the human body that was necessary so that we now have GPs and doctors who know what they're doing. Instead of having body snatchers like they did in Edinburgh, or waiting until you go down a dark alleyway and bonking you over the head and doing it that way, this doctor would invite you for tea. And your tea would be laced with laudanum. Laudanum was available over the counter. It's an opium derivative, a bit like tramadol, but about 5 times the strength of the average tramadol tablet your GP would give you now. But it was a liquid form. 1 drop would give you a good sleep. 2 drops was believed to give you an abortion. 3 or 4 drops would make you immobile, but still conscious. So they said. And if you had 2 teaspoons, you're dead. So depending on what particular experiment this doctor was going to do, he would lace your tea with the correct amount of laudanum to ensure that you actually did not have any pain. And hopefully were not aware of what he was doing. Now, there was a homeless lady who lived across the road. Now, there's an odd thing to say. She lived in the doorway of what was the alleyway to lead you to the venue, the jailhouse, the Newmarket, Nicky's, whichever pub you remember being up there. She lived in that doorway. She'd been homeless most of her life, and she'd lived in that doorway for 25 years. Everybody knew her. If she had extra food, or if somebody had given her sweeties, she would give it away. She would give the extra food to her friends who were in the same situation as her. And if she was given sweeties because she knew they were supposed to be bad for your teeth, she would give them away. Well, she knew children liked sweeties, so she'd give the sweeties to the children that happened to be passing. So everybody in Elgin knew Nellie. And she was a really nice wifey. And then this one January, she says to her friend one day, "The doctor's invited me for tea." And her pal's like, no, don't yet. You can if it happens. Because having the front row seat that they had, they saw how many people went in the front door and how many didn't come back out. And they're like, you know what happens, you'll disappear. And she's like, no. I've had enough. It's too cold out here for me now. I'm too old. I'm going to go and have my tea with the doctor. So she did. The following morning, she gave away all her belongings, the few bits and pieces that she had, divided them amongst her friends, said her goodbyes, and went and knocked on the doctor's door at Calder House. She was invited in for tea. As she went in, she turned round and waved at her friends across the road. The following day, the commuters in the morning walk to their work. Where's Nellie? Where's Nellie? Her stuff's not there. Nellie's always there. Nellie's been there for 25 years. After a few days, the sheriff's men start hearing these rustlings of the town grapevine. And the sheriff's men go and speak to our friends, because of course if anybody's going to know where she is, it'll be our friends. And one of the young men who helped look after her turns around and he says, yeah, she went for tea at the doctor's house. We've seen a few people go for tea at the doctor's house. We've never seen anybody come back out. You might want to have a look into things there. Now, one of the wee young lads who used to do the running for the Elgin Couldn't an advertiser overheard this conversation. And when the sheriff's men went off and carried on with their inquiries, this young lad went on the doctor's house, Calder House. He said, excuse me, sir, the sheriff's men are coming to speak to you. He gave him a couple of pennies, told him thank you. He took himself up to his room and killed himself. Rather that than go to jail, being that it was the late 1700s, early 1800s, better that than go to jail. So when the sheriff's men went in, they found the doctor in his bed. Oh well, there's an admission of guilt if ever I saw one. So they searched the house. The house is good, the house is clear. Down in the basement, they find some things of concern. Various bits and pieces in jars. One of the sheriff's men stood in the corner, crying. And his boss sings out, what's wrong with you? That's Nellie. I've kened her since I was a wee boy. And the boss goes over to see what he's talking about, and he's like, yeah, right enough, that's Nellie. Everybody knew who she was. She was easily recognisable. So that's where she went. So the house is emptied by the sheriff's men. They take all the evidence. Eventually, the bedroom is cleaned up and cleared up, as is the basement. The furniture is replaced, and the building's put on the market for sale. See, this doctor didn't have any family. No brothers, no sisters, no girlfriend, no wife. Nobody even knew who his parents were. 5 years after the building went on the market, it's still empty. At this point, the Privy Council, which later on became the Town Council, got together with some of the hoteliers, because there was, we had a couple of hotels there for people who were travelling by stagecoach. Got together with the hoteliers and like, what do you do when you double book somebody? Oh, we usually send them to another hotel. But what if they're all full? We put them up in one of our staff quarters. Okay. Which leaves you sleeping on the couch. Yep. What about if anybody was double booked? You could send them over to Calder House to sleep. Really? Well, it's fully furnished. It's on the market. Nobody wants it. So the hotels can use it if they want. And then the hoteliers came back with, yeah, that's a good idea. And they could come back to the hotel just for their food. And then we wouldn't have to charge them for accommodation, or we'd just charge them a nominal fee and charge them for their food. So this was agreed between the Privy Council and the hoteliers. Under the one caveat, you do not tell the tourists why the building is empty. So a few years later, there's a travelling salesman from. He must have come up on the wagon and horses, because it took him 3 days to get here. He went over to the hotel, which is nowadays Burton's. And he goes in, and the guy on the counter is like, I'm really sorry, sir, but we've double booked you. We don't have a room. He's like, well, what am I supposed to do now? I can't exactly go home. And they're like, oh, you could stay in Calder House. I'll have a member of staff take your belongings across to the house for you. And he's like, okay. And what about food? No, you come back over to the hotel for your food and we'll sort you out with your breakfast and whatnot. Can I offer you a drink just now? So he has a dram while the staff member takes his belongings over. And he comes back and he's like, there's the keys, sir. Help yourself. I've put your bags on the landing. Choose any room you want. So by the time he decided to go to sleep, he was a little under the influence. So a staff member helped him over the road. It's a long walk when you're blutered and you've been sat down for 3 days in a coach. So he goes over with the staff. And the staff member says to him, he says, right, you can have any room you want throughout the whole house. Okay. To be drunk. So I'll have the room that's furthest away from the door. So he's up on the 3rd floor on the right-hand side of the building. So he's 3 floors up above the Clydesdale Bank, pretty much. And he's just settling down to sleep. And there's a wee on the door. And he's like, go away, I'm in here. I'm in here, this room's occupied, find another one. So he dives out of bed, rips the door open, what? And there's this wee old wifey there. She's got crazy hair. A bit like mine, except white. And she's giving it... What? What did you say? I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what you're saying, dear. Speak up. Now, to explain this a little better, he's from Newcastle. She's speaking Old Elgin Doric, which is more Gaelic and Norse than English. More Gaelic and Norse than our Doric nowadays. So he's at the point of exasperation. He's like, what are you saying? And she steps forward and she looks up into his eyes. I'm seeking my lichs and my lover. As she looks up into his eyes, he realises there's nothing here. Empty sockets. This is enough. He barges past her and bolts down the stairs, across the road, back to the hotel, and he spent the night on the couch in the front lobby of the hotel. As he's pushing past her, she's calling after him, "Far's my lichs and my lover?" The following day, over breakfast, he says to one of the staff members, one of the girls who's dishing out breakfast, "Do you speak that language that them outside do?" "Yes, I do, sir." "Can you translate a phrase for me?" "Okay." "What's the phrase?" "I'm seeking my lichs and my lover." "Oh, yes, sir." "But who on earth said that to you?" And he's like, "Never mind that. What does it mean?" "Why, sir, it means I'm looking for my lungs and my liver." At which point it dawned on him. Nobody could be alive with their eye sockets empty like that. As he brushed past her to get to the stairs, her jacket came open, and he saw a big gash in her torso, from her right shoulder to her left hip, to be precise. Nobody could withstand that and still be alive and talking. Shocked, he asked a member of staff to go and fetch his belongings from the building, because there was no way he was setting foot back in there. When he got home a few weeks later, he wrote to the Elgin Courant and Advertiser. "This is what happened to me when I was in Elgin." The newspaper published the article, and as the same newspaper still does to this day, 50 years ago today, yes, it's the one that is now the Northern Scot. 50 years ago today, and 100 years ago today, and 150 years ago today. The version of the article that I found was from 1895, and it was something like 100 years ago today or something like that. And they published the story along with the travelling salesman's letter. But in all the times that they had ran the story originally, ran it again as a 50 years ago today, and ran it again finally as 100 years ago today, 15 different people from different parts of the country had written to say, "My granddad told me about that house. He stayed there when he was a young man. My great granny told me about that place. Her dad stayed in there when he was travelling," and so on and so forth. So there's 15 different descendants. Within 100-year time, there's 15 different descendants who have a family member who saw this lady. Now, when he described, because later on, the papers wrote back to him, "Can you describe this lady?" So he did. The sheriff's men had gotten a hold of the story, and they were reading it in the Elgin Courant and Advertiser. The young man who had been crying over Nellie's body almost fainted while reading the article. When Nellie had been found, she had no eyes in her eye sockets, and she had a surgical wound from her right shoulder to her left hip. There's 15 different letters being sent to the paper about this. So 15 different people who at least have one family member who have seen Nellie in the house that she died in. Nellie Homeless, as they christened her, is Elgin's one and only documented poltergeist case. And she died in what was, at that point, the biggest house in Elgin. And that's 1 minute past 8. So the big houses talk ended up turning into ghost talk. This is a reprint from the 80s, but if you're doing a book search on Google Book Search and it gives you, "Oh, we have this article from the Survey of the Province of Moray," they are worth a read. They tell you who lived where, what families were registered at that address, how much rent they paid, who they paid their rent to, and if they had any servants. Very interesting read. Thank you, Mrs. Heron, for my present all those years ago. It's a wifey Heron that used to buy the Hannah in Houtman. She gave me that a few years back. So, not so much the subject I was aiming at, but there's not that many big houses that were built as big houses. Most of them that still exist were built as businesses, so they kind of don't count. But I hope you enjoyed the random detail about Highfield House, the Park House, and the Findrassie House. And I will see you again tomorrow. What's on the thing for tomorrow? I can't remember. What have we put up for tomorrow? Let's have a look, see. Ding, ding. What have we got? Oh, tomorrow's Lambride. Guess who's going to be spending all day hitting the books tomorrow? And that's not even all the gory details. I've cleaned it up a little bit. I'm one of those freaky people who's watched horror movies since I was like 7. So, apologies. But that's how they knew who it was. Because her wounds matched the wounds of the woman that they saw. I hope everybody had already had their supper and wasn't planning on a late supper, and I hope I've not put you off. But I will see you tomorrow. And hopefully I find something interesting about Lambride, other than geological stuff and things like that. If not, if you know any stories about Lambride, let me know. And I will see you tomorrow. Stay safe and make sure you're looking after you and yours. Night night.